these things are things that she gave to us.
Okay.
And you mentioned Governor Sigelman. We're not the archives for the state of Alabama as a corporate entity. There's a state archives in Montgomery, and the governor's office records and the records of all the cabinet officers and that sort of thing go there to the state archives. Just like records of the federal government go to the National Archives or the Federal Records Centers that are scattered around the country. But the state archives also collects private things, and hers is more of a private collection. And the National Archives does too, to a much more limited extent. I mean, they have their hands full with records of the federal government, but I think they do have some private things. One of the things that came up in the last class that you might be interested in, I'm sure as journalists you're familiar with laws related to access to public records, what are commonly called open records laws. And in the case of records of the executive branch of the federal government, these are governed by the Freedom of Information Act, the Federal Freedom of Information Act, and also by different federal court decisions that have interpreted the Federal Freedom of Information Act. The thing that you might want to keep in mind when you deal with these state or federal laws about access to public records, they're often called like the Freedom of Information Act or the Sunshine Law or the Open Records Law. They could just as well be called the Closed Records Law, because if you look at the Federal Freedom of Information Act, basically what it says in the first paragraph is all archival records of the federal government are open to public inspection with these exceptions. And then it spells out all the different exceptions, which have to do with things like national security. It has to do with things like trade secrets of private businesses who do business with the federal government, all kinds of different things. And one of the laws that affects Auburn and all institutions of higher education in the country is a federal law called the Buckley Amendment, or the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. And what that law says is that if you want to keep getting federal money at your university, student records, personally identifiable information about current and former students who are not deceased is closed to public access, with the exception of what's called directory information, and that's information that would be in the student directory, or your height and weight if you're a member of an athletic team. And what that means is that if your mama or your daddy or your Uncle Billy or whoever pays your tuition went over to the registrar's office and said, I want to see what little Johnny made in calculus, they would say, you have to have little Johnny's permission to look at that information. And the way that this frequently comes up with us is you may have heard of Dean Cater. Anybody heard of Dean Cater? This kind of, in our view, old-fashioned dean of women who made female students wear raincoats over their gym suits on their way to and from PE class. The Dean of Women's office records contain a lot of information, not exclusively that, but a lot of information about discipline, about student discipline. And we have people who want to write term papers about all these quaint rules and things that Dean Cater had and the university had. And if it involves personally identifiable information about a former student that's still living, that can be a problem. If we can verify that the former student is dead, it's not a problem.